You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
James Rollins.
Authors. I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website. Developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates, PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have one of my favorite authors, and in my personal reading life, as well as one of my favorite past guests on the show, James Rollins. It's that time of year again where we get a new Sigma Force book, and I got so excited a few weeks ago when I got the new Sigma Force book in the mail, and I posted on Instagram. That must mean it's that time of year again. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thanks, Hank. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, first off, do you remember what the first, because this is something that you deal in your books, these historical mysteries, conspiracies sometimes, but these things that awaken ideas in us that maybe seem like they shouldn't be. Do you remember what the first historical mystery that you discovered was, that kind of opened your mind to the possibility of these amazing things that lie in our past?
Well, I think it wasn't so much my own imagination. It was, I grew up reading Clive Cussler. And, he passed away recently, and I think that was a great loss to the industry.
Absolutely.
That was his bread and butter. I mean, he looked for pieces of history that ended in that question mark, those mysteries out there, and went about solving them. So to me, that's the way he wrote the story. Today I think I'm just sort of somewhat following in the huge footprints left behind by Clive Cussler. I have almost a little shrine to Clive here. I think not only is he a great writer, he was a very generous person. He was the first person that gave me a blurb for one of my books. So he was always one that was willing to give, hand and pull an author out of obscurity and give them a little spotlight, which was a rarity. So that's where sort of my love of this looking for those mysteries of the world. And again, a part of me, though my day job now is a writer, prior to that I was a full-time veterinarian. But in my long list of things I wanted to be when I grew up was archaeologist. So again, there was already that love of ancient mysteries. So, that's I'm always got my feelers up looking for that next great mystery. I peruse archaeology magazines, the Smithsonian magazine. I go to different museums and look for those pieces that might become, tidbits of a story, and began cobbling them together into a book.
And you can't discount, if you're a writer today and, someone of our generation or a little bit older, the impact that, that first Indiana Jones movie had on the way that we think about, history and historical mysteries and things like that. I know for me, and a lot of my friends, that was the first time that you even thought that archaeology could be something that you could pursue, or that it kind of made it sexy almost.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's still one of my favorite movies is Raiders. When I got a chance to do the novelization to the last indie movie, that was like one of the crowning jewels of my writing career, was being able to put on Indy's hat and pick up that whip, and for the time I'm writing that novel, put myself into his shoes and run around on this crazy adventure.
Right. Well, one of the things that I love about your books is you take these historical mysteries, these anomalies, these things that most people don't know or haven't considered, and you find a way to merge them, smash them headlong into a current event or technology. How do you stay abreast of the new things coming out? And what is that aha moment like when new meets old in your mind?
Well, besides looking for those historical mysteries, being that I have a sort of a science background, all science is incorporated in my novel, science, technology, engineering, math, any aspect, physics. I've covered everything in my books, and so I'm always looking for those what ifs that from a scientific standpoint or a technological standpoint in which I could build a story. And so I collect those also, and I basically just have a big box. I put those historical notes in there, I put those scientific notes in there, and it's a bit of serendipity in that as I'm sifting through there, looking for maybe ideas that no longer are applicable or somebody's already tackled that topic, so I can throw them out of that box. I'll end up with a piece of history in one hand and a piece of science in the other, and just because they randomly happen to be either on the floor next to each other or in my hand at the same time, I begin to see, vague connections between the two, and then I'll do some research to see, can I actually connect these two dots? And if I can, and if I feel it's almost like this innate snowball feeling, it sort of grows in my mind, and then I know there's a story to be built there. And I'm also looking for that topicality. I'm looking for that story that might have some bearing on today. As a matter of fact, the book I'm finishing right now, not to sidestep from the Last Odyssey, is that the current Sigma book that I'm finishing up is called The Savage Zone. And it's all about viruses. It's all about, why do we have killer viruses? What's the history? What's the evolutionary necessity for a virus? What is a virus? It's not so much a pandemic novel, but it's unfortunate because it gives a great illumination into the mysteries and wonders that is virology. So again, I missed that target by a little bit regarding to get topicality, but I'm always looking for those pieces that might have bearing on today.
Well, one of the reasons I think that we love the Sigma Force books is not only for these kind of teasers that we talked about, the historical and the high tech, but we get to experience those things through this group of characters, Sigma Force itself, which Sigma Force operates as a unit, which has which serves kind of one purpose for the story, but then that unit is made up of individuals who we have come to love through the books, and they each kind of take a starring role, from time to time, or we get to experience this particular thing through one of their eyes. How do you decide who of Sigma Force this story is going to affect the most?
That's one of the reasons I resisted doing a series initially. I didn't want to do a series. All my initial adventures were standalones, and I was getting a lot of pressure from my publishing house. Jim, why don't you do a series? Have a recurring character. I don't really want to do a recurring character because of what I call the Jessica Fletcher syndrome. From Murder, She Wrote, here's this from Cabot Cove woman that's constantly stumbling over dead bodies every week. eventually that suspends your disbelief. Like, why is this woman always tumbling over dead bodies? And also, it's hard to maintain jeopardy in a series character because, if one week somebody puts a gun against Jessica Fletcher's head, that trigger's never going to be pulled because there's another episode next week. So it's hard to maintain that level of threat. So when I introduced Sigma Force in what I thought was a standalone novel called Sandstorm, they were sort of ancillary support for the main cast of characters. I really liked that group, these sort of swashbuckling scientists with guns that work for DARPA to solve face different threats against the U.S. and the world. I thought, gosh, I can base a series on a group of characters, have an ensemble cast where nobody's necessarily safe because I can knock off or majorly injure a significant character, but because they're a group, they can always recruit a new member to fill that gap. So I like being able to maintain that level of jeopardy. But in regards to, I also like to be able to shift that spotlight, like you mentioned, where different characters. Of course, this novel, at the very beginning in Map of Bones, the first book in the series, Commander Gray Pierce runs into a assassin for hire named Seishan. Their initial works are a bit of a fireworks in that they get into a major battle, they shoot each other, and now we're several books into the future and they have a child together.
Right.
So I like that arc of characters that you can do across a series. So that's one of the positives about a series is that you get to see the spectrum of these characters' lives over a span of time. Is that they're not static, they grow, they change. They've got their own personal lives that impinge upon their adventures, and it allows me to cast a light on different characters to see whose life is going to be most impacted by this story. And that's the character I'm going to make sort of the major point of view character for the novel is trying to figure out who is going to have the most impactful adventure in this certain book, and then I will shine that spotlight on them. In this case, The Last Odyssey, it's the point of view of a character that I very rarely shine a light on. During the course of these 15 novels, Kowalski has only had a point of view character in one book called The Bone Labyrinth, and then he faded back into the background of a non-point of view character. But in this book, the spotlight focuses back on him. So, and there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why we sort of focus on Gray and Seishan, because we try to figure out, how does a couple with a young baby, be adventure heroes? What responsibility do you have for, when you have a kid at home? Should you be putting your life in danger when you have a child that's looking for you for support going forward? What does it mean to be that type of character in an adventure story?
I love Kowalski as a character, and especially as a point of view character, like in this book. Is it? Do you have to work on the story for a little bit to kind of settle into that character's mindset, or are you kind of thinking about that from the very beginning? Like, how long does it take you to settle into the point of view and to kind of figure out who the story's about?
Initially, I would say it took me a little bit of time, but now that I've written 15 novels featuring this cast of characters in various flavors, I know them so well that it's pretty easy to slip into their point of view. I've got to be careful, actually, when I'm writing novels. I don't, change point of view to pop into the head of a character that's not supposed to be a point of view character, because I know them so well. It just feels like, well, this is what they would think, and well, no, we're not in their point of view, so I can't tell you what they're thinking. I have to sort of demonstrate it through their action and their dialogue. So. But yeah, I'm so comfortable with these characters at this point, after writing 15 books with them, that I slide into that point of view pretty smoothly.
Right. Well, new readers, when they hear us say that this is the 15th Sigma Force novel, one question people invariably have is,
sure,
well, do I need to go back to book one, or can I pick up this book? I think you could jump into any of the adventures and have a great read. But are you conscious of building the character's backstory as you go along, and is there benefit to reading them in order?
I definitely am assuming that you've never read one of my books before whenever I write a novel. So they're definitely, I try to make them feel as standalone as possible, so that whatever backstory and tidbit of history of these characters you need to know, I'm going to seed into the story so you're not felt lost. I don't think there are that many people that have read my series in order. I think most people have just jumped in wherever, and if they like them, hopefully they'll fill in the blanks from there. But yes, if you read them in order, there's an arc of character and nuance that you probably appreciate better if you're reading them in order. But by no means is that a necessity. Like most people, I don't think, have read my series in order. They just happen to find the books, at a airport bookstore. The cover copy intrigues them. They pick it up, they read it. So everything's self-contained, so they're not going to feel like, where am I? What's going on with these characters? Who are these people? I'm going to tell you.
In this book, and I love your first chapters or your prologues. In all of your books, because you set us up for a roller coaster usually that the bottom just drops out from there. This is a really interesting beginning to this book. What are some of the because you drop a lot of information on us up front. We're dealing with a lot of issues in the world, and then we're confronted like headlong with this ancient mystery. Where do you drop us into the story in this book?
Well, the story starts out, again, I just want to sort of take the character and drop them right into the middle of a mystery. So at the start of the story, there's a group of researchers that are exploring this meltwater channel in Greenland, and this meltwater has revealed an ancient ship, a medieval ship that's buried about half a mile underneath Greenland's ice cap. The ship holds sort of a collection of ancient Bronze Age artifacts. Some are wondrous, some are horrific. There's a clockwork gold map that apparently was crafted by these Muslim inventors, these inventors that are considered to be the Leonardo da Vinci's of their time. And it's a map that's rumored to lead to Tartarus, the Greek version of hell that's featured in Homer's Iliad and The Odyssey. And as this ship is exposed, it draws a group of zealots that are looking to open the gates of hell and unleash an apocalypse. And it's up to Sigma Force to go where no humans fear to tread, is to cross through those very gates of hell to save the world.
Which opens all sorts of imaginations, and you start to realize that this idea of Tartarus or hell or the underworld is an idea that had permeated all of these ancient cultures, and you see allusions to it in myths and in their mythologies. When you came up with this idea and started doing research for it, were you surprised at the way that some of these ideas repeated all over the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I think is really fascinating, is that, the way, not just the way mythology seems to be some commonality across different cultures and peoples, but also our rituals. Why do we bury people? What is our fascination with caverns and caving? I'm a spelunker myself growing up, so I can definitely appreciate that intrigue and mystery. But what is the reverence about that? Why do people have a tendency to make caves sites of worship, or they adorn the cave with art? What is it about the mystery of what's underground, and why, for some reason, do we always seem to connect that with some underworld, some place where the spirits go to whether it's hell or whether it's something less punishing and horrific. So that's something we explore in this novel, is the fascination we seem to have with all things buried. I think it goes back to also the fact that nothing stays buried forever. Is that it seems that as much as we try to hide secrets, eventually they get exposed.
Right. There's a connection to Da Vinci in this book, and we allude to it in the opening of the book.
Sure.
And then there's this group of Muslim inventors who apparently informed Da Vinci that he learned from them. Maybe have taken some ideas from them. if anyone lately has had really bad PR, it has been the contributions that the Muslim world have had on society and technology. That's not the first thing we think of when you start thinking about things coming out of the Muslim world now.
Right.
How did you discover this, and kind of walk us through some of that, if you would?
Well, went back to, I was at a museum, and they had a series of astrolabs, and I was noticing that all these navigational inventions and tools from advancing the early rudimentary versions of these navigational tools to more advanced versions, the biggest leaps forward in that technology were occurring from Islamic inventors. There was what's known as the Islamic Golden Age. It ran from the 8th to the 14th century. There's a great, gigantic school there called the House of Wisdom, where they were basically concentrating on STEM research, from science to mechanical engineering to technology to math. And what they were basically doing during that period of time, that same period of time, the Islamic Golden Age, was the Dark Age of Europe. And as Europe was sort of sinking into this golden age of their own, into something darker. A lot of these Islamic inventors were gathering that knowledge that was about to be lost in Europe and preserving them at the House of Wisdom and other places in the Islamic world and building upon them. There was a inventor called Ismail el-Jazari. He was from the 12th century. And he invented all manners of tools, from water clocks to sophisticated automatons. He wrote the book called The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices that contained diagrams for about 100 different inventions. It's but Leonardo da Vinci himself has said that he was influenced, even borrowed, from the works of El-Jazari, who died 2 centuries before Leonardo was born. So he basically, Da Vinci again carried forward the torch of innovation that had been abandoned by the Islamic world after its golden age began to dim. And I was sort of fascinated by that, the way the path of innovation, it seems to pass from one hand to another, from one country to another, from one century to another. And it seems like as soon as one society seems to be falling into ruin or stagnation or choosing to stop innovating, and the Chinese did it after the Ming era, the Arab world followed it suit after that 14th century when the Islamic Golden Age faded. Someone always seems to pick up that torch of innovation and keeps it lit and keeps it burning. And I just find that sort of fascinating.
Not only the ancient Islamic world, but ancient Greece also has some pretty stunning technology that we don't normally think about.
And again, that came about because, I don't travel that much for research per se. I mean, I will do a little bit of, like I'm writing this book, I should go over here and look at this. But most of the time I just travel for the fun of it. I love to go to museums. And I was at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and I got to see the Antikythera mechanism. This device that was discovered in a shipwreck in the Mediterranean, and it's a device that looks when you look at it, it looks almost like a computer. And further analysis from archaeologists now accept that the device was probably some crude version of the first known analog computer. So I started doing more research about, how advanced were they with this, and I found out that, the Greeks were really amazing what they were able to accomplish with, wires and gears and rudimentary versions of automatons. Historians and archaeologists have documented, countless designs of these self-operating mechanisms, these cunning automatons, these ingenious mechanical devices. So again, a part of this book is shining a light on exactly how advanced they were with their technology.
When you, if you watch things like the History Channel, and there are invariably these specials about ancient technologies like this, and one of the most popular, from a popular television standpoint, one of the most popular ways of explaining this is, the ancient astronaut theory, and we've got this whole line of programming which is based on that, and that is really unfortunate, in my opinion. It really does a disservice to the contributions these ancient people did, and I think it robs us of of watching the progression of human wisdom and thought, and to think that we had to be handed information of this, and people can't discover things like that on their own.
Well, I think it's a part of our own sort of myopic vision of history. We look at our world and we think we're the most advanced there ever was. And we underestimate the technology of these ancient peoples. I mean, these people were experimenting, and they didn't have television to occupy themselves, so they were very busy inventing things. They were looking at the natural world for inspiration. They were experimenting. They were, coming up with things that were amazing. And I think again, like you said, it's sort of insulting to the human intellect and our curiosity and our ability to invent by saying, oh, no, we couldn't have done that. It had to be these ancient astronauts that influenced us. I think we have amazing brains, and we are always exploring and manipulating our world. And I think it's one of the goals of this book is to say, hey, look, shine a light on exactly how wonderful the human inspiration and curiosity and invention is. Right.
Well, it wouldn't be a Sigma Force book if we didn't have this ancient mystery or these ancient ideas that then come crashing headlong into our current history. How do apocalyptic cults play into this? And tell me what you learned about the people that still believe in the end of the world, and even are set about to try to make this happen.
Well, that was again going back to the commonality of cultures. When I was doing this book, I was looking at specifically, what are the various views of the underworld? What are the various views of Hades and Tartarus and hell? And what's the commonality amongst those different cultures? While doing that, I realized there was also another sort of commonality, this view that the world is going to end. That seems to be universal, that we're always looking to when we're going to meet our demise. And the commonality, there's some sort of intriguing ways that everybody seems to be viewing that end of the world in a similar fashion. Whether you're looking at different end of the world scenarios, there's a certain amount of commonality across different cultures. Well, what's worrisome for me is that now there's a certain zealous movement going on, believing that we are in the end times, the biblical end times, and that it's very close to happening, and that at this point there's even political factions, and they're looking to basically move the hand of God towards that end time. They're trying to make it happen. They're trying to look like they're looking forward to the end time, so they're trying to make it happen now. And it's not just even in Western nations. The Islamic world also has their own sort of end times cults out there. Even the supreme leader and president of Iran believes that the end times are on us. He's what's known as the 12th. He believes the 12th Imam is about to reappear in the world. And again, there seems to be this goal from a political standpoint, a military standpoint, to try to engineer those end times to happen so that it meets biblical end time philosophy or prophecy, rather.
Right. James, we were talking right before we started recording about when we're recording this, even though when you're hearing this, it's release day for the book, but we're recording this about a week earlier, and here in the U.S., we're kind of reaching a fever pitch where a lot of businesses are closing or at least altering their hours. We have all of our schools have been canceled for a week or two at least. A lot around the country here where I am, they're all shut down. People are not getting out and mingling about at the moment. And, we were discussing, what your feelings were about how people are going to be consuming books for the next little bit. I like to be optimistic, and I think this is a great time for people to embrace Kindle editions of books. You can, buy it off of Amazon, or there's several other digital options as well, and audiobooks. I think I have all of the Sigma Force audiobooks in my Audible account because even when I read them in hard copy, I just love going back and listening to them. It's a completely different experience, and these books are just absolute gems in audio format. How do you see how this is going to play out for the publishing industry, and what do you think writers should be doing to embrace where we are?
Well, first of all, I think no one knows. We're in this paradigm where publishers and bookstores are struggling. I just returned from Phoenix yesterday, and I was surprised actually how many people were traveling, by the way. The airports were actually not that sparsely populated. I was like wanting to ring a bell, plague, everybody, social distance, get away from each other. Right. Even Southwest was like not allowing anybody to sit in middle seats. You had to sit in the aisle or the window seat. They weren't allowing anybody in middle seats to keep some social distancing in the plane. So it was just interesting from a epidemiological standpoint to study what was going on in these airports. But from the standpoint of the publishing world, it's going to be a trying time, not just for authors who are tours are canceling, and now there's going to be much foot traffic at bookstores, so it's going to be impacting sales, but also it's harming these, especially independent bookstores. They're going to be really hit hard by this. I had a conversation with the owner of Poison Pen, and they're deciding, do we close? What's the proper role here? If we close, then my employees then are losing their paychecks, but we also don't want to expose people. So there's this whole sort of quandary on where you draw the line, and we've never had this situation before, so there's no roadmap to follow. And so we're all sort of trying to figure out how do we, like in my case, I have a tour that was scheduled that looks like it's most likely going to be canceled, and it's all going to go digital, and so it's an interesting period of time. At the same time, maybe it will not be as grim as I'm anticipating, in that, what's better than a good book when you're stuck indoors? I remember back in the ancient past when we were on an airplane and you had nothing else to do but read, because you didn't have the internet that you could access online, or you didn't have your pads or your games that you can play on your lap. So to me, I always loved going on a flight because I had no other choice but to read, which was perfect. I had no other distractions. I got a starred review from Publishers Weekly for The Last Odyssey, and they described it as one of the great pieces of escapist fiction. And I think books are a great way of distracting and getting your mind out of the grimness that seems to be on. There's a certain level of panic that seems to be in people, and I think, maybe we just need to sit back and relax and take a deep breath. And I think a good book is one way of getting your mind, pulled away from the constant need to check your news feed on exactly what's going on with the coronavirus. Also, this story in particular is sort of a big Mediterranean caper / adventure. We travel from one side of the Mediterranean to the other during the course of this novel. So for those that, can't travel to Europe anymore, here's a, way you can be an armchair tourist across the breadth of the Mediterranean by reading the story.
Right. Well, if I might offer a suggestion, I think people should grab the audiobook, and then all the money that you're saving in gas because you can't drive anywhere, save that money, and then when the bookstores open back up, go grab your hardback copy for your bookshelf. I think that's a great solution.
Definitely support those stores out there.
Absolutely.
As much as you can, whether
support
it's ordering
your
online
local
from
bookstores.
them or helping them out afterwards. It's right now they definitely can use a kind, generous hand.
For sure, absolutely. We need to support our local bookstores. Jim, let's switch gears for just a second, because I know that your first love in a lot of ways is fantasy. And I think we've talked about that in the past, how you were a huge fantasy fan. Did I see a press release a few months ago that you are going back to epic fantasy?
I am. I just signed a new contract for a new series. Again, I started my career as two authors. I was James Rollins, the adventure thriller writer, but I was also James Clemens, the epic fantasy writer. I wrote 7 big doorstopper fantasy novels. I was writing a fantasy novel a year and a thriller a year. And I've still sort of maintained doing 2 books a year, but for the last decade or and a half or so, I've been doing basically just 2 thrillers a year. So I got this concept for a new fantasy, just sort of popped in my head, and it's something that I've been dabbling with, I think, at least now for, 7 years since I first had this idea. And it's been building, like I said, that snowball I mentioned earlier about this huge adventure, and it's a very cool concept. I don't want to give too much away. And that book will be coming out the first book in that series will be coming out next summer. I mean, not this coming summer, but the summer after that.
Will you be publishing that as James Rollins?
It'll be published under James Rollins. Since
Okay.
At this point, it's the poorly kept secret that James Clemens is James Rollins. So it seems sort of a matter of artifice to try to pretend that I'm still James Clemens. So it'll be under James Rollins.
Well, without giving away any details or specifics or anything, so don't feel like that. But when writing fantasy as opposed to like a Sigma Force novel, when in Sigma Force you're looking for things to anchor this grand adventure in, things that are real, whether we know about them or not. That's kind of your specialty, is finding these things that we don't know about, but then convincing us that this is actually anchored in the real world. So that scenario versus a completely new world that is your invention, where the physics and everything are completely at your control, and being able to use magic and all the great things that we love about epic fantasy. How freeing is that to switch gears like that as a writer? And could you just kind of touch on the creative process in those two worlds?
That's one of the things I really enjoyed in the first quarter and a half of my career when I was doing a fantasy a year and a thriller a year, is they're very different animals. Your thriller is a staccato paced, set in the real world. Fantasy, it's world building. It's a little bit of a slower pace. It's you get to play God in creating this world, because you get to create the history, you get to create the mythology, you get to create the science of this world. So it's a great deal of fun to be able to build that world, and at the same time, one of the challenges of writing fantasy is to do that, but not feel like you're info dumping upon the reader. You want to have a thrilling story to tell. You want to have characters that people latch onto, and while at the same time revealing this world. So it's a great deal of fun because it's a bit of a challenge. You get to play God to build a world, but at the same time you have to tell an interesting and fascinating story, so you don't feel like you're just reading a dry treatise of this world. So
that's going to come out next year, 2021.
It'll come out summer 21, correct?
Excellent. James, you also have a collection of short stories coming out soon, right?
I do. I have it's called Unrestricted Access. It's an anthology of all of my short stories that I've written over the past 2 decades. Many of the short stories are difficult to find anymore. They're scattered across different media and different anthologies, so we're going to collect them all into one volume. I've also written sort of introductions to these stories, sort of give you a little peek behind, how my mind works and why I told the story, and how I went about figuring out how to write those stories. So it's a little journey through my career, basically, from writing my early short stories to what I wrote most recently. But also, I don't want to just sell you old material. So included with this anthology is a big novella. It's about 100 pages long, featuring Tucker Wayne and his military war dog Kane. And they're a pair of characters that appeared in Bloodline, one of my Sigma novels. And I spun them off into their own individual stories. And so now they're going to have a new adventure themselves.
Ray Bradbury famously extolled the virtues of writing short stories, especially for new writers. And, he encouraged people to write a short story a week. And if you do that for a year, surely you can't write 52 bad stories. How does writing short fiction help keep your skills honed as a writer?
Again, similar to writing, the difference between writing fantasy and writing thrillers, even short story form is very different in that again, you have a very limited space in which to introduce your reader to your characters and the situation at hand, and then resolve it within a matter of 15, 20, 25, 30 pages. That's challenging to pull off. There was I can't remember who said this. I probably should look this up. Is that I read that when it came to writing fiction, writing novels is the easiest because you have a lot of elbow room in which to tell a story. And when you shrink it down to a novella, you're somewhat restricted, so it's a little harder. You shrink it down to a short story, it's even harder because you're trying to fold all of that into even through a tinier funnel. And then the hardest thing is to write poetry, because then you're stripped down to just the bare essentials where every word has to matter. So when it comes to short story writing, it's you have to judge every sentence with much harder under a microscope, saying, do I really need this because I don't have that much space to tell a story? You have to get down to the bare essentials, while at the same time not feeling like you're leaving the character with a threadbare skeleton of a story. So it's hard. I find actually I will spend nearly as much time writing a short story as it takes me to write a quarter of a novel.
Right. The new book, The Last Odyssey, the 15th Sigma Force thriller book, is out everywhere now. There's links to it in the show notes where you can get it digitally, or as we said, be sure to visit your local bookstore. They need you and your business right now, even if you have to wait a few days for them to open back up. There's plenty of options for reading the book. Jim, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show today. If folks want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
If you want sort of the encyclopedia of James Rollins, my website is probably where to find that, jamesrollins.com. I have all information about each of the books in the past and what's happening in the future. I've got a sort of a Q&A section for people that maybe are considering writing, a whole sort of section about writing in general. But also, if you want just the day in, day out life of James Rollins, you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And, you can find out what's going on a more daily basis.
Excellent. We'll put links to all of that in the show notes of this episode. James, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
I appreciate it, Hank. Thanks.
Stay tuned now for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Ember War.
The near future. The probe slowed as the sun's heliosphere disrupted the graviton wave it rode in on from the abyss of deep space. Awakened by the sudden deceleration, the probe absorbed the electromagnetic spectrum utilized by its target species and assessed the technological sophistication of the sole sentient species on Earth. The probe adjusted its course to take it into the system's primary. If the humans couldn't survive, with its help, what was to come, then the probe would annihilate itself. There would be no trace of it for the enemy, and no chance of humanity's existence beyond the time it had until the enemy arrived. The probe analyzed filed patents, military expenditures, birth rates, mathematical advancement, and space exploration. The first assessment fell within the margin of error of survival and extinction for humanity. The probe's programming allowed for limited, autonomous decision-making, choice being a rare luxury for the probe's class of artificial intelligence. The probe found itself in a position to choose between ending its mission in the sun's fire and a mathematically improbable defense of humanity, and the potential compromise of its much larger mission. Given the rare opportunity to make its own decision, the probe opted to dither. In the week it took to pass into Jupiter's orbit, the probe took in more data. It scoured the internet for factors to add to the assessment, but the assessment remained the same. Unlikely, but possible. By the time it shot past Mars, the probe still hadn't made a decision. As the time to adjust course for Earth or continue into the Sun approached, the probe conducted a final scan of cloud storage servers for any new information, and found something interesting. While the new information made only a negligible impact on the assessment, the probe adjusted course to Earth. It hadn't traveled all this way for nothing. In the desert south of Phoenix, Arizona, it landed with no more fanfare than a slight thump and a few startled cows. Then it broke into the local cell network and made a call. Mark Ibarra awoke to his phone ringing at max volume, playing a pop ditty that he hated with vehemence. He rolled off the mattress that lay on the floor and crawled on his hands and knees to where his cell was recharging. His roommate, who paid the majority of their rent and got to sleep on an actual bed, grumbled and let off a slew of slurred insults. Mark reached his cell and slapped at it until the offending music ended. He blinked sleep from his eyes and tried to focus on the caller's name on the screen. The only people who'd call at this ungodly hour were his family in Basque country, or maybe Jessica in his applied robotics course wanted a late-night study break. The name on the screen was Answer Me. He closed an eye and reread the name. It was way too early, or too late, depending on one's point of view, for this nonsense. He turned the ringer off and went back to bed. Sleep was about to claim him when the phone rang again, just as loudly as last time, but now with a disco anthem. "Seriously?" his roommate slurred. Mark declined the call and powered the phone off. He flopped back on his bed and curled into his blanket. To hell with my first class, he thought. Arizona State University had a lax attendance policy, one which he'd abused for nights like this. The cell erupted with big band music. Mark took his head out from beneath the covers and looked at his phone like it was a thing possessed. The phone vibrated so hard that it practically danced a jig on the floor, and the screen flashed "Answer Me" over and over again as music blared. "Dude," said his roommate, now sitting up in his bed. Mark swiped the phone off the charging cord, and the music stopped. The caller's name undulated with a rainbow of colors, and an arrow appeared on the screen, pointing to the button he had to press to answer the call. When did I get this app? He thought. Mark sighed and left the bedroom, meandering into the hallway bathroom with the grace of a zombie. The battered mattress he slept on played hell with his back and left him stiff every morning. Dropping his boxers, he took a seat on the toilet and answered the call, determined to return this caller's civility with some interesting background noise. "What?" he murmured. "Mark Ibarra. I need to see you." The voice was mechanical, asexual in its monotone. "Do you have any friggin' idea what time it is? Wait, who the hell is this?" "You must come to me immediately. We must discuss the mathematical proof you have stored in document title This Can't Be Right, doc. Mark shot to his feet. The boxers around his ankles tripped him up, and he stumbled out of the bathroom and fell against the wall. His elbow punched a hole in the drywall, and the cell clattered to the floor. He scooped the phone back up and struggled to breathe as a sudden asthma attack came over him. How? He couldn't finish his question until he found his inhaler in the kitchen, mere steps away in the tiny apartment. He took a deep breath from the inhaler and felt the tightness leave his lungs. That someone knew of his proof was impossible. He'd finished it earlier that night and had encrypted it several times before loading it into a cloud file that shouldn't have been linked to him in any way. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "You must come to me immediately. There is little time. Look at your screen," the robotic voice said. His screen changed to a map program, displaying a pin in an open field just off the highway, connecting Phoenix to the suburb of Maricopa. "Come. Now." Mark grabbed his keys. An hour later, his jeans ripped from scaling a barbed wire fence, Mark was surrounded by desert scrub. The blue of the morning rose behind him, where his beat-up Honda waited on the side of the highway. With his cell to its
Some things you write now, do they differ in the writing process from
plants, looked a lot like benign mesquite trees in the darkness. A Native American casino in the distance served as his North Star, helping him keep his bearings. "You're not out here, are you? I'm being punked, aren't I?" he asked the mysterious caller. "You are 9.26 meters to my east-southeast. Punk, decayed wood, used as tinder. Are you on fire?" the caller said. Mark rolled his eyes. This wasn't the first time the caller had used the non-standard meanings of words during what passed as conversation between the two. Mark had tried to get the caller to explain how he knew about his theorem and why they had to meet in the middle of the desert. The caller had refused to say anything. He would only reiterate that Mark had to come quickly to see him, chiding him every time Mark deviated from the provided driving directions. "If you're so close, why can't I see you?" he asked. He took a few steps in what he thought was a northwesterly direction and squished into a cow patty.